Welcome to Code and Beyond, a podcast brought to you by Bola Ogunlana, and welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us and really get into the good stuff, pulling out the key knowledge and insights, well, specifically for you. Today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, the research paper on the biology of a large language model. It gives this incredible look inside Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Haiku. That's their lightweight production model. So our mission today is to explore how this cutting-edge AI seems to process information and think.
Exactly. And it's all about getting a real grasp of some genuinely interesting material without you having to wade through dense research papers for hours. We've done the sifting, basically, so you can just listen and get the important bits. What's really exciting about this paper, I think, is that it's not just theory. It's actually Anthropic researchers investigating their own model using some really innovative methods.
Absolutely. And what I find so compelling is the whole approach, almost like studying a biological system, like the title suggests. They talk about features inside the AI as maybe being the building blocks of how it computes things. That's a really intriguing analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What exactly are these features they keep mentioning?
Yeah, that's the key starting point. The paper actually points out that the definition of a feature is still evolving in AI research, but at its core, it means these patterns of activation within the model's neural network. You know, that huge web of interconnected nodes learning from data. And these activation patterns seem to line up with concepts we can understand. Think of them like internal signals that light up when the model sees or thinks about specific things like certain words or maybe grammatical structures, or even more abstract stuff like positive or negative feeling, or the idea of, say, the Eiffel Tower.
Huh. So it's kind of like the model has these little internal detectors that fire off when it's processing certain kinds of information.
Precisely, yeah. And the researchers are using tools, specifically these things called attribution graphs, to try and map out how all these different features connect and interact with each other. It's like making a super detailed wiring diagram for a really complex circuit. And these graphs let them form ideas, hypotheses about the underlying ways the model gets from your prompt to its final answer.
Okay, right. And this is where it gets really interesting, I thought. They're not just like drawing diagrams. They're also doing these perturbation experiments to actually test their hypotheses. What does that really mean?
Right. So once they have an idea, a hypothesis about a particular circuit or maybe a set of features working together, they can actually go into the running model and mess with those features a bit. This could mean like temporarily blocking a feature or maybe even artificially activating it when it wouldn't normally be active. And by watching how these changes, these interventions affect the model's behavior, what it outputs, they can get much stronger evidence for whether their diagrams, their attribution graphs actually match what's really going on inside.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like poking the system to see how it reacts. So they're using these methods to look into a whole bunch of Claude 3.5 Haiku's skills. The paper gives some really cool examples. Let's start with that first one about multi-step reasoning. The capital of the state containing Dallas is
Austin. Yep. And what's truly remarkable here is that the researchers actually found evidence suggesting the model performs those two separate steps internally. So first identifying, okay, Dallas is in Texas, and then remembering, the capital of Texas is Austin. It wasn't just that it had memorized that specific question-answer pair.
So wait, it's not just a fancy lookup table then. They could actually see some kind of internal signal for Texas activating as like an intermediate step.
Exactly that. And they even ran experiments where they deliberately interfered with that internal Texas representation. They replaced it with the internal signal for California. And when they did that, the model then correctly answered Sacramento. It really strongly suggests there's a genuine reasoning process happening, though, as the researchers themselves admit, there might still be some memorization involved too. It's probably a mix.
Wow. That's a pretty profound glimpse into how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the poetry example? How on earth does an AI seem to plan to rhyme? That sounds different.
Yeah, this was another one that really blew me away. They found that when Claude 3.5 Haiku is writing poetry, it often looks like it's planning its rhymes ahead of time. So before it even writes a specific line, the model activates features that correspond to possible rhyming words that could fit at the end of that line. And these pre-selected options then seem to guide how the model actually builds the sentence leading up to that rhyme.
Hold on. So it's not just generating words one after another. It's thinking about the rhyme target, the end goal, and then working backward to construct a line that flows naturally towards it. Does this suggest some kind of basic intention in the AI that maybe we haven't really grasped before?
That's a really sharp question, and it gets right to the core of what this kind of mechanistic interpretability research is uncovering. What they found was evidence of both that forward planning, picking the rhyming targets, and a kind of basic backward planning, where the model essentially crafts the sentence structure to land on that planned word naturally. They could even go in and edit the model's planned rhyme word internally and then watch it rewrite the whole line to match the new rhyme.
That's incredible. Seriously, it's like the AI has a little poetic objective and it's strategizing to hit it. Okay, now, the paper also talked about multilingual circuits. How does Claude deal with different languages?
Right. This is where the idea of the model's internal abstractions gets even deeper. They looked at how Claude finished the same basic prompt, the opposite of small is, but in English, French, and Chinese. And what they discovered was pretty cool. The model seems to use a mix of circuits. Some are specific to each language, but others seem to work on a more abstract, language-independent level.
Language-independent circuits. You mean it's grasping the idea of opposite separately from the actual words being used?
That seems to be the implication, yeah. They saw that the core mechanism for figuring out the antonym of small seemed to be driven by these shared multilingual parts. These features lit up consistently across all three languages. But then, at the same time, there were other language-specific features that made sure the final output was correct for that language. So big in English, grand in French, and that character in Chinese.
And the paper mentioned that these language-independent circuits were, more prominent in this haiku model compared to a smaller one they tested. Could that mean this ability to generalize concepts across languages is somehow tied to the model just being more capable overall?
That's a really insightful point. It definitely hints at a deeper level of understanding, something beyond just memorizing translation pairs. Although they did also notice that English seemed to have a slight sort of privileged status. These multilingual features often had stronger direct links to English output words compared to French or Chinese.
Huh, that's a fascinating little detail. Okay, shifting gears slightly, they also look into how Claude handles something really basic like addition. What do they find there?
Yeah, they really dug into how Claude 3.5 Haiku adds two-digit numbers, something like 36 plus 59. Their findings suggest it breaks the problem down into several parallel tracks. It seems to do a rough, maybe lower precision estimate calculation at the same time as it's calculating the one's digit specifically. And then it combines these results somehow to get the final answer.
So it's not necessarily doing it the way we learned in school, column by column carrying the one.
Not exactly like that, no. They did find what they called lookup table features, which seem to have basically memorized single-digit addition facts like 6 plus 9 and 15. But the overall strategy for two-digit addition looked a bit different from typical human methods. What's really interesting, though, is that they found these same addition-related features popping up in totally different situations that needed addition, sometimes really subtly, like figuring out times based on astronomy data or keeping track of money in a table within a story.
So the model is recognizing the underlying need for addition even when it's not explicitly written as a math problem. It sounds like a pretty flexible ability. By the way, Bola Ogunlana invites you to visit bola.ogunlana.me for more insights and discussions like this.
Absolutely. And it really underscores how these internal features can be reused or repurposed for very different kinds of tasks. They even looked at a case where the model correctly solved 4 plus 5, 3. And it seemed to have an internal representation of the intermediate result, the 9A, but it was somehow marked as not for immediate output, hinting that it has a way to handle steps in a calculation.
This is all just, wow, incredibly insightful. The paper also briefly mentioned areas like medical diagnoses, right?
Yeah.
Where the model seems to identify possible conditions from symptoms and even use those internal ideas to shape the follow-up questions it asks. It really sounds like they're starting to peel back the layers on how this AI reasons across lots of different areas.
They definitely are. And it's important to remember, as the paper itself stresses, these are still early days in really understanding these incredibly complex systems. Their tools, like any scientific instruments, have limitations. They might not always capture the whole picture, and the examples they show are often the ones where they did manage to find something interesting. There's still a lot we don't know.
Yeah, good point. But even these first glimpses feel like a pretty big step forward, don't they? Just being able to get this level of insight into the internal workings feels like a major advance in making AI less of a black box, more interpretable.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge step. And it immediately brings up a whole load of new questions, which the paper actually lists at the end. Questions like, what are the actual limits of this internal multi-step reasoning? How do these planning abilities change as models get even bigger and more complex? What's the real nature of these multilingual circuits? And crucially, How does the model know what it knows versus what it's just guessing to help stop it from making things up?
Right. So just to quickly recap then, what's really striking here is that by using these clever tools, attribution graphs, perturbation experiments, researchers are genuinely starting to map out the intricate biology, so to speak, of large language models like Claude 3.5 Haiku. They're finding these surprising internal mechanisms for things like reasoning through steps, planning ahead like in poetry, handling multiple languages abstractly, and even having some basic sense of its own knowledge state.
Exactly. And like we've been saying, this research feels like a really positive move forward in our ability to actually understand these incredibly powerful AI systems. It's about getting real, tangible insights into how they tick.
And this brings up, I think, a really interesting thought for you, the listener, to mull over. How might this growing understanding of AI internals actually shape the future of technology and our relationship with these systems? As we get clearer on how they think, how could that change how we build them, how we use them safely and effectively, and even just how we interact with them day to day?
Definitely something worth thinking about.
Well, that's all the time we have for this particular deep dive. Thank you so much for listening to the Code and Beyond podcast. And please, don't forget to check out bola.o gunlana.me for more insights and discussions.